Senator, what's the gist of the Pandemic Response and Management Bill 2020 in brief?
The gist of the bill, we're dealing with a pandemic, and during a pandemic, there are certain actions that need to be taken because there are exceptional circumstances. Much of the action, if you look at the memorandum of the bill, is really to provide for a proper manner one through which the pandemic is, declared to be a pandemic. The relevant committees to be set up with the national government and the county governments to make sure there is coordinated efforts and for the response by both levels of government, as well as making sure that when there is a pandemic, the measures that are put in place to cushion Kenyans, to deal with the economic issues, to deal with the distribution of food and water and basic supplies and the medical interventions. That really is the gist of this bill.
Okay, so how exactly does it address to the most vulnerable members of the society in terms of food and shelter?
The first thing that the bill provides is that one, there shall be established a fund from which we have safety nets. If you look at section 31 of the bill, it says that one, there shall be safety nets to vulnerable persons, households that are vulnerable, informal sector workers, whose incomes might have been disrupted by the pandemic. And this includes cash transfers to help them meet their basic necessities, as we've seen in various other parts of the world happening. On top of that, during the time of a pandemic, we provide that the national government or the county government can waive water and electricity charges for the identified vulnerable people, adjust tariffs for those who are producing, essential commodities, of course, provide a means through which penalties are waived at that point, and ensure that the flow of food, for instance, to a capital like Nairobi, remains uninterrupted. And also when you talk about rent and rental income, to cushion the landlord and the tenant during that period, the landlord can get relief later, but they have to get into an agreement with the tenant on how they can pay after the pandemic if the tenant his financial capacity has been affected by the pandemic.
How will you address those two parties? Because this landlord-tenant relationship is the one that almost everybody has been speaking about. So how exactly will you address the concerns of both parties?
Number one, you must understand that any tenancy arrangement is governed agreement, even if it's a verbal agreement, but there must be an agreement. Sometimes in contracts, you have what you call force majeure, where by an act of God or pandemic, you're not able to fulfill your obligations during that tenancy agreement. So what we provide for is that the tenant whose capacity has been affected gives notice to the landlord in writing, and they're then able to meet the obligations at that point. And then upon receipt, the contracting parties shall sit down and agree on how the tenant shall meet their obligation at the end of the pandemic. Now, what I've provided for after that is that the CS responsible for matters of housing provides measures then to cushion the landlord and the tenant. This could include, if for instance you're staying in my house and you've not been able to pay for 3 months, I can be able to go and get an income tax relief for that period. I can be able to get a waiver from the charges that I'm supposed to pay government on utilities, on many other things. So we've seen it world over being done, such that the landlord gets his income, but you're not able to pay, but you'll be able to pay after the pandemic, for instance. And so that agreement is entered into to protect both you and the landlord.
All right, Senator. How will the bill ensure that the banks do not end up punishing borrowers whose loans fall due during the difficult period?
Section 26 of this bill says that where a pandemic has a negative impact on the capacity of members of the public to meet their contractual obligations when it comes to loans and mortgages, a borrower and the respective lending facility enter into agreement to review modalities. This can be a waiver on the interest. You can reamortize your loan so that you go on paying the interest after the period of the pandemic has been declared over, and it is pushed forward. We can say the penalties are not imposed by the defaulter. On a defaulter, you're not listed by the Credit Reference Bureau at that point. And so those are the general provisions around loans and mortgages. And actually, as it is today, many banks are actually, if you call your bank, they say, okay, come, we can restructure your loan for this period of time. How much are you comfortable paying? Then we can resume the normal repayment. So it's about flexibility. And remember, when there's a pandemic, we appeal to humanity. You know, I mean, it's nothing that somebody has asked to happen. And so you appeal to the goodwill, even though these are private engagements. So this is just providing a framework for that to be, accepted by the law.
Senator, as much as it's a pandemic and we are appealing to humanity, what will the taxpayer have to contribute to fulfill the intent of this particular bill?
Well, nothing outside the normal. In fact, this is to protect the taxpayer. And when we say we establish a fund, because I've called it Pandemic Response and Management Bill, because it's not just about Corona. Something might happen in 5 years or 10 years or in 2 years. So we need to have savings in that fund so that we can cushion. We've seen, for instance, the US has put a $2 trillion fund to help small businesses, to help those who are vulnerable. Already we are talking about 10 billion in Kenya, and it's going up maybe to 20 billion. Once we have that, the work of government is to protect its people. And so these are the times when you want the tax reliefs. These are the times when you want to see maybe the frontline health workers, for instance, being told for the period of the pandemic, if you're a health worker in the frontline, you will not pay income tax. And that extra 30% can actually help you, it can go a long way. And so this is the time to protect and to cushion, not to further burden the taxpayer.
Right. So just to be clear, Senator, this is a fund that shall be created by the national government.
It shall be created by the national government. If you look at the provisions of this act, it says that the fund shall be created by national government. There'll be money coming from national government, donations or gifts made into the fund. We've seen, for instance, Jack Ma has donated some money, the UN has donated some money. So any money from any other source can come into this fund for the purposes of managing and responding to a pandemic.
As we wind up our interview, Senator, will the bill be in place for posterity to address any future pandemic or crisis of a similar nature? This is you have mentioned it yes. Right now. Just to be clear, could you expound on that?
Yeah, sorry. The bill is not about Corona only. The bill is about any pandemic that might visit our country, that might come in future. But the provisions of the bill are only used when the president has declared a pandemic according to this bill. So it is not that now once you've gotten those waivers, they go on forever. No. There's even a point at which the pandemic is declared over and this committee is shut down 2 months after the pandemic.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Senator, for giving us your time. We shall be contacting you soon.
Thank you very much. God bless you. Good job.